93, 93, 93. This is Aman Asha Renew from AshaRenew.com. Today I will speak on, is the sun sign more important than the moon sign? The reason why this is asked is because in Eastern or Vedic astrology, there is a high emphasis on the moon. That's why we have what is called lunar mansions, which is a concept that is not found in Western astrology because most Western astrology does not consider the fixed stars other than the zodiacs, the 12 zodiacs. If we analyze the sun sign, we understand we have a solar return once a year that we call our birthday. However, if we analyze our moon sign, we have a lunar return once a month, which is the position the moon was in at the time of your birth. So you have this occurrence 12 times a year versus once a year, which represents the solar return. So you would think, well, should the moon be more important because the moon is shifting 12 times a year versus the sun only shifts once a year. So why would the sun be more important if it's changing less frequently? And I would say this is because in the West, here in the West, we emphasize the solar currency, especially because we follow the Gregorian calendar. So there is a extra emphasis on the cycles of the sun versus if you go to the east, there was a extra or there is an extra emphasis on the moon, which is clear when we observe Chinese New Year, which is based upon the new moon. So the date is not set in stone. January 1st would always be New Year's in the West, but New Year's in the East is in accordance to the cycles of the moon versus the cycles of the sun. So we see, just depending on where you fall on the planet, it will determine whether it is more solar influenced or lunar influenced. Your moon sign more so lets you know how you're going to deal with your everyday happenings versus the sun represents your goals and your aspirations. So the sun essentially always represents the direction you're moving towards. So every time you have a solar return, essentially your direction is updated. However, every time you have a lunar return, this represents your emotional currency or the update to your emotional currency, which happens 12 times a year. So once a month, your emotional currency is updated. So essentially, how you feel and all the things you experience on a emotional level change monthly. And because they have monthly fluctuations, the moon essentially does have a greater impact because the moon, as said earlier, represents your day to day happenings, how you deal with the lunar currency, your month to month currency versus your year to year currency. So if we understand the energy changes on a monthly basis, then we can understand, okay, well, that's why we have to pay bills on the first. That's why bills are reoccurring on a monthly basis. So this is how we can begin to understand the moon and the importance of the moon versus the sun. Because if we have issues with the everyday cycles or the everyday currents, this is the moon, and we tap into the intelligence of the moon to see how to solve those issues versus tapping into the intelligence of the sun to get more clarification on your overall direction. So essentially, the more smaller, subtle emphasis is on the moon in terms of how you decide to navigate your monthly directions versus the solar directions, which is how you navigate on a yearly basis. And the yearly basis is represents the solstice and the equinox. We have two solstice and two equinox on a yearly basis. Versus on a monthly basis, we are dealing with cycles that are occurring more frequently. It takes the sun 365 days to go through the entire zodiac. The moon is doing so every 30 days. So, of course, we see the moon is moving a lot more quicker. And that's why many of us are on the lunar currency, even though we are here in the West. We may be more in tune with the moon. So you must ask yourself, are you more in tune with your solar currency or your lunar currency? And that really is dependent upon the person. So, yes, we are taking into consideration whether we are in the East or the West, we are taking into consideration the culture. However, if we are considering the being, the spiritual being, that's going to be on an individual basis. So you just must ask yourself, do you prefer the day over the night? Do you prefer the conscious over the subconscious? Do you prefer the dream or the waking reality? This will give you more clarification as to is the sun or moon a greater factor in your particular chart so that you can emphasize the moon more if needed or the sun more if needed, depending on what you're trying to accomplish on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. If you are a person that thinks more on a monthly basis, then the moon will be more important. If you are a person that thinks on a yearly basis, then the sun will be more important. Like you have people who get paid based on a salary, meaning they get all their money all at once in a budget, the managers and such. Then we have the people that get paid, every week or every 2 weeks. And you see these are based on solar or lunar currencies. And this is how they base, how they pay people, how people are paid, and how people rank up. All these things are based on solar and lunar cycles. So you decide for yourself which one is of greater significance to your particular journey. And then you make the decision as to pay more attention to the solar return or the lunar return. And with that, I bear peace. 93, 93, 93.